at the Daily Mail. And no doubt a lot of politics going on this week. Victoria, hope you're doing well.
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me, Todd.
Victoria, just really curious, to get your take. We've seen these. It's really a surge of nationalism, people being proud of their country, and I don't know. It did my heart good to see what happened over in England over the weekend.
I think for the most part, it's great. They've had some issues with people being able to express their free speech over on the other side of the pond. And so I think it's good to see people taking to the streets in this way. For the most part, the government not getting in the way of it.
It's fascinating because there was some reporting out over the weekend. 13,000 people in the UK have actually been arrested for something they wrote on Facebook or X. It's just insane, the crackdown on free speech over there.
It absolutely is, and a lot of this is tied to the Online Safety Act, which I think, ironically, it was actually sponsored by some leadership of the Tories, the Conservative Party, and now actually the person that sponsored that legislation has now become a member of the Reform Party, which of course is the party that won big in the elections earlier this month there on the local level. And so I think it's interesting that, this person created this piece of legislation, but I think it's also a good warning sign to Americans where, you might have legislation with the best of intents, but when the wrong people get into office, they may take it the completely wrong way. So, as somebody that covers Capitol Hill, I think that's something that our lawmakers here in the U.S. need to, keep in the back of their minds, that make sure that they're writing legislation that can only be used in the way that they intended to.
I do want to switch to what's happening on Capitol Hill, and you're up there. You see all these things happening in real time. Are these lawmakers, are they aware of how angry the base is on the Republican side of the aisle? Are they aware of just how frustrated and angry Republican voters are? Because this is not a good time to be an establishment Republican in America.
Absolutely. I mean, they're frustrated for a number of reasons. Of course, when we talk about the base, you have things like the Save America Act, you have things like the FISA reauthorization, which is working its way through on Capitol Hill right now. They see a Republican Party that controls all three branches of government here in DC, in the nation's capital, and they don't understand why their priorities, which they also believe are the president's priorities, are not getting accomplished by our lawmakers.
When you look, for example, at what happened over the weekend, Senator Cassie, I don't think that was much of a surprise. Were people, do you think people were surprised up on Capitol Hill at how badly he got defeated?
Well, Cassidy himself told me earlier this month that he planned to win. The thing that prompted me asking him that question was actually a poll a few weeks ago that had him in third place behind Fleming and Letlow. And, that poll ended up being prophecy, where that's exactly what happened. Cassidy didn't even make the runoff. And, Cassidy, of course, is the one that voted for, the impeachment of President Trump, which of course angered a lot of Republicans, including the president himself. But, he's also tried to kind of get back in favor with the base, for example, as is his position with the Senate Health, that's the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. He ushered through the nomination of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And so he really tried to play both sides. But I think this goes to show that in the Trump era, you can't have people that want it both one way and the other. You have to have people that are in line with the president, or they end up facing the retribution, which has happened not only in Louisiana, but also on the state level. We looked at Indiana earlier this month as well. The president backed a bunch of challengers to state senators there that did not back the Republican redistricting push. And most of those senators don't have state Senate seats anymore.
And of course, now you've got Thomas Massie on the hot seat. Man, has that turned? I mean, it went from just being, hardcore politics and being opposed to President Trump to now scandal involved with all of these salacious things. What can you tell us about that?
Of course, this is the big test. Massey has been somebody that's been in the president crosshairs, of course, on the Epstein issue, which I've covered extensively in my role for the Daily Mail. But also, you look at issues, for example, like the Iran war. Massey was the one that introduced war powers resolutions, has done so numerous times, stemming back to last July when we saw those initial strikes on Iran's nuclear sites. And so, a lot of people want to bring up the issue, the Iran issue, but I think you also have to look at the fact that Massey has not backed a lot of the president's priorities, even going back to just about a year ago now, the tax bill, the major Republican tax bill, big beautiful bill, working families tax credit. It's gotten, multiple names here on Capitol Hill, but he was somebody that opposed it. And so, when you talk about people that want to view themselves as fiscal conservatives, limited government Republicans that want low taxes, it's hard for him to make that issue when he didn't support that legislation.
As a matter of fact, President Trump earlier today posting on True Social, the worst congressman in the long and storied history of the Republican Party is Thomas Massie. I would have thought it was somebody else, but he's going with Massie. He is an obstructionist and a fool. Vote him out of office tomorrow, Tuesday. It will be a great day for America. And Massie, at least in some polling I've seen, is trailing. So the incumbent could be going down tomorrow. How are things looking? What are you hearing?
Well, this, of course, is the big test of how much does the president's endorsement weigh, as well as outside money. That's been one of the things that you look at here. There's been millions of dollars spent to oppose Massey and back his Trump-backed challenger, Ed Gallerin. But I actually had the chance to go to Kentucky last fall and, attend a number of Massey's events where he really did seem to be pretty well liked by the people in his local area. And so I think it's interesting where, I've seen polling as well that shows Massey trailing, but I also think it's pretty hard to do that polling on a geography like northern Kentucky. He covers multiple media markets. In that corner, he covers both into the Louisville and the Cincinnati media markets. And so that's definitely been an expensive race for the president and his allies to play in. But of course, it all comes to a head tomorrow. And, I think the world will be watching.
Victoria, real quick, before we let you go, I'm just curious about Majority Leader John Thune and the unwillingness among Republicans to publicly call him out or condemn him for standing in the way of the Save America Act. Why do you think that is?
Todd, that's a good question. I think it's the fact that he has to juggle multiple priorities at the same time. And so I think that's kind of one of the issues that he has to deal with is that, he's got both his legislative priorities as well as other additional pressures from the president. But, he's also watching his back in terms of the campaign, right? Like, for example, we were just talking about Cassidy. He backed Cassidy both for the committee chairmanship, which he holds, as well as in this race lots of the establishment Republicans tried to back him. And so, I think he's got definitely not an enviable job. I think it's one that few people would want up here on Capitol Hill. But I also think it goes to show the importance of, in these midterms, making sure that the people that are aligned with the president are the ones that are getting these nominations, just like we saw with the Louisiana results earlier this weekend as well.
All right. Well, Victoria, we're going to have to leave it there. Victoria Churchill, everybody, a U.S. political reporter at the Daily Mail.